Spakovsky is a former FEC commissioner and these days a senior legal fellow at Advancing American Freedom. Mr. von Spakovsky, thanks so much for taking the time. Good to talk to you again, sir.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me back.
Remind people, Advancing American Freedom. It's online, advancingamericanfreedom.com. Who are you folks and what do you do?
Advancing American Freedom is a think tank that was started by former Vice President Mike Pence. And we are pushing and believe in the kind of conservative principles that Ronald Reagan put forward, which is adherence to our Constitution, the rule of law. And that means things like limited government, lower taxation, a strong defense, and those are the kind of issues that we're working on.
And again, Mr. von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow within the Edwin Meese III Institute for the Rule of Law at AAF. It has been a week since the president spoke to the nation. Were you surprised by anything he said in that series of remarks with regard to election interference?
I was shocked, but not really surprised. I mean, first of all, the intelligence reports that they have declassified show that the Chinese government hacked into the voter registration systems of 18 states. I'm not surprised at that because, Jeff, you may remember during the Obama administration, the federal government, they had to admit that the Chinese government had hacked into the Office of Personnel Management. That's like the HR department, the federal government, and had stolen the personnel files of former and current federal employees, 22 million files. Now here, the president says they stole the voter registration files of 220 million Americans. I'm shocked that it happened, but not surprised that the Chinese government is engaging in this kind of behavior.
What about the reaction from members of the public and especially elected officials? I mean, the president gave the speech, and of course those on the far left prior to his remarks downplayed anything that he might have said. That's typical advanced spin, obviously, but I'm not sure there was much reaction that will lead to anything actually happening to prevent it from recurring this fall.
Well, it really tells you something about the critics of the president that they started criticizing him and downplaying this right after the speech before they had even had time to review the treasure trove of declassified intelligence reports that all of this was based on. And, anyone who's criticizing him about this without having looked at that, they're just doing it for political reasons. Well, look, there's two things that are happening. One, the president said that he had instructed the federal agencies involved to immediately notify the states whose voter registration databases had been compromised so that they can basically engage in cybersecurity audits and try to fix the vulnerability so it won't happen again. But look, the other big thing he revealed is the intelligence agencies who discovered all this hid it, not just from the public, but from Congress, and hid it from the president. In fact, he cited email and other communications in which intelligence agents admitted that they were massaging the president's daily briefing to make sure he didn't find out about it. That right there is outrageous because that shows partisanship inside our intelligence agencies, and in fact, it's dangerous. Everyone whose files were stolen should have been told about this years ago so that they can be prepared, take precautions over it, and yet they hid this, not only, like I said, from the president and the public, but also from state officials who are charged with trying to fix their systems to prevent this.
That, to me, was the most striking thing, and I commented about it on the air right after the remarks. The fact that you have multiple layers of the government keeping things from the President of the United States when it has to do with such crucial security issues, I don't know that many of us, you obviously with your experience do, but I don't know that many of us can truly understand the forces that this president, this administration has to fight on a daily basis just to do the modicum expected in the job.
Well, let me tell you, when the president and his folks complain about the deep state, the swamp, they are not exaggerating. Look, I spent years over at the Department of Justice, then I was over at the Federal Election Commission, and I can tell you, there's this huge swath of career civil servants inside federal agencies, including at the Justice Department, who are partisan left-wing ideologues. And when a conservative president comes in, they do everything they can to fight all of his policies, to sabotage what he's doing. And that's, unfortunately, the literal truth. And it turns out this also has infected our intelligence agencies who, I mean, that's one place this shouldn't be happening, because what they do, gathering intelligence on our enemies abroad, is vital to the defense of this country. And yet this shows that those agencies, frankly, need to be cleaned out, and large numbers of people need to be fired in the same manner that they, for example, got rid of all the people working for USAID.
We're speaking live with Hans von Spakovsky. Mr. von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow at Advancing American Freedom. You can learn much more at advancingamericanfreedom.com. He's kind enough to join us on the newsline on News Talk 1540 KXEL. The deep state is frightening, and so now let's go back to something that maybe somebody can address sooner than later, and that is election integrity. What are the steps that should be taken? We hear a lot about Save America Act. We also know, though, that these are 50 independent states that monitor elections and have some leeway with regard to how they prosecute those things. So what is on your list of things that should be done sooner than later to restore credibility in the system, in the minds of the American people?
Well, it's interesting you asked me that, because I'm actually talking to you from Orlando. I'm at the conference of ALEC. That's the American Legislative Exchange Council. That's the National Association of mostly conservative state legislators from all over. And this has been their biggest issue and topic this week, particularly after the news came out in the middle of the conference that the New Jersey governor had to admit that because of a supposed glitch in their DMV system, they had registered to vote 6,600 aliens. But not to worry, Jeff, only 400 of them voted in
goodness.
elections.
Thank goodness. Right. I feel so much better.
But look, what folks here are talking about is, they'd like to get the SAVE Act passed by Congress, which would put in proof of citizenship requirements and voter ID. But what I've been telling folks here is, don't wait for Congress. States ought to be passing their own state version of the SAVE Act. You ought to have a voter ID law in your state that applies to both in-person and mail-in or absentee balloting. And you should be doing two things if you're a state election official. One, using the DHS federal database. It's actually called the SAVE database, to check the citizenship status of people who are already registered to vote and people who are registering. But you also should pass a state requirement that you have to provide proof of citizenship to register to vote. And, Jeff, anybody who says, that's just too much, it'll disenfranchise people, that's the same thing they said about the first voter ID laws that were passed 20 years ago. Hasn't happened. States like Georgia, Indiana that put ID laws in, their turnout went up. And by the way, anybody tells you it's just too much to require proof of citizenship, you should ask them, well, do you have a job? Because if you have a job, under federal law, you had to provide what? ID and proof of citizenship for you to get that job.
Well, that does not fit the narrative, however. And I recall when this was discussed here in Iowa, requiring some form of identification. And I heard from people, and the audience has heard me tell the story. I heard from the folks who said it will disenfranchise the young, it will disenfranchise the old, and it will disenfranchise minorities. Well, one day on the noon hour, I walked the 2 blocks to the Waterloo, Iowa Public Library, and who did I see in the lobby? I saw a person under 18, close to 18. I saw a senior citizen. I saw a person of color, and all of them had ID cards in order to check out DVDs or books. So if we were requiring it to check out a $30 item at a municipal library, but we think it's too burdensome when it comes to exercising constitutional right on self-governance, the argument just does not wash.
Well, it not only doesn't wash, but voter ID laws have been in place now for over 20 years. Georgia's was passed in 2005. So was Indiana's. So we have actual turnout data for the last 20 years that we can use to compare states with ID laws and states without ID laws like New York and California. The turnout data shows absolutely that those claims that it keeps people from voting, particularly the elderly, the young, that is just not true. It's not true. In fact, Chuck Schumer, who, is a big opponent of voter ID, and has gone after the state of Georgia for having ID. New York, has no ID. Guess which state consistently has higher turnout when you look at Georgia and New York? Georgia. Mm-hmm. Georgia consistently has higher turnout than New York, and it has an ID law.
Is there optimism, either in your mind or the minds of the people that you're talking with, that this can be fixed before it becomes irreparably harmed, the system?
There is optimism that this can be fixed. Many of the cases on these issues, because as you know, anytime any state passes any kind of election reform, they're challenged. The challengers are pretty much uniformly losing. And that's why the Georgia voter ID law, the Indiana voter ID, both of which were challenged in court 20 years ago, are in place today, because the people challenged them lost. So states should keep working on this. There's all kinds of other reforms that they should put in place, and we can do that to clean up the system and it basically increase everyone's confidence.
Absolutely vital. Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow, Advancing American Freedom. AdvancingAmericanFreedom.com is the website. Mr. von Spakovsky, thank you so much for taking time away from the conference to speak with us, and come back again soon.
Sure, anytime.
Very good, sir. Have a good weekend and safe travels. Hans von Spakovsky joined us live on the Newsline.